welcome to the iGamingFuture virtual roundtable series. This time we're focusing on the future of responsible gaming. With the UK gambling review round the corner, regulation is changing quicker than ever, and we're bringing together some of the sharpest minds in player protection to help you understand what the future of responsible gaming looks like. Over to our esteemed panel for brief introductions. If we could start with Rasmus, please, and then we'll move around and just get a quick intro from each of you guys.
Definitely, I'm Rasmus Kjærgaard, and I'm the CEO of Mindway AI. We are a company providing knowledge and solutions related to responsible gambling, and we are, let's say, a scientific-based spin out of Aarhus University.
Okay, and Matt, can we go with you next?
No problem. I'm Matthew Curtis. I'm the head of responsible gambling for LNL Europe. We're a Malta-based UK, Swedish, and MGA licensed casino operator who puts a strong emphasis on player protection.
Thank you. And Ian?
Yes, my name's Ian. I'm the head of player protection at BetBull. We are a very fast online sports betting and casino operator, very fast growing. We're a product-focused gaming company. And we have a unique community and social betting experience on our site.
Thank you. Kerry?
Hiya, so I'm Kerry, the head of compliance at Lottoland. We're licensed in a number of jurisdictions, so UK, Gibraltar, Malta, Sweden, South Africa, there's quite a few, and we're based in Gibraltar.
Thank you. And Heather?
Yep, so I'm Heather McKee. I'm head of UK compliance for GameSys Group PLC. We are based in, again, Malta and Gibraltar, and we have our London headquarters. And I've been in the industry for about 5 years. Prior to that, my previous life was financial services. And you'll know GameSys from typical brands, Jackpot Joy, Virgin Games, etc.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. And so sort of to start off, I think you've probably had a bit of a heads up on questions, so you probably know what's coming. But the first one, how important do you guys think it is, self-regulation is in today's market? What role does it play in the future success of our market? And perhaps, I mean, probably good to start with Kerry and Heather on that one. Kerry, do you want to sort of start us off? Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So I think like each operator is best placed to understand the risks they face by its business model and the products that they do offer. Regulators do have to trust that licensed operators will implement appropriate controls to ensure it's meeting all licensing objectives. But I do think it's all about like the operators working together, really. I think that's the really important part when you need to self-regulate.
Do you think that's something that's sort of improving over time? It's always been a bit of an issue, hasn't it, this idea of the regulators and the operators having a proper dialogue that works for everyone. Do you think that's something that progress is being made on?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, an example of that, be like a good example of that where it has worked is like with the UKGC and the BGC group. Yeah. So like if we think about the game design, I think that's worked quite well working together there. So and there's lots of other examples. I do think it is working. It's getting better, but there's still a lot of improvements to be made there.
Thank you. Heather, can I ask you the same question? How important is self-regulation, do you think, and how should it be working in the future of the market?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's very important, and I think the industry has learned quite a lot over the last 10 years or so in terms of improving that. I agree with Kerry. You know, it's individual operators will operate differently in terms of that, but I mean, we work in a risk-based, outcomes-based, regulation in the UK in particular, and so obviously that means as long as you get to the required outcome, how you get to that is entirely up to you. I do think the BGC have done great work as well. Obviously GameSys are a member of the BGC, and I think the BGC have really pushed self-regulation and actually changing things as a trade association in the industry, which I think's worked really well. You know, taking the lead ahead of regulation coming in from the GC. So yeah, I think it's always going to be important for any industry to self-regulate.
Brilliant. And Rasmus, I was curious from your perspective. I understand that Mindway have made a hire from a regulatory background recently. So you guys probably have seen the benefit of bringing the regulators in. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and just how that helped?
Yes, of course. You're absolutely right. We did elect the former Director General of the Danish Gambling Authority, Birgitte Sand, to our board of directors a couple of weeks ago. Prior to that, obviously, we have had several talks about such a position and the role and so on. And some of which actually I was just crossed my mind when you, Carrie, said this about starting the dialogue on collaboration between operators and also between the regulator and operator and associations and so on in all the industry. Actually, I think that that was something they in Denmark, the Danish regulator, headed by Birgitte for 12 years prior to her stepping down last year, has been very successful in having a kind of open dialogue, open approach to operators, to try to collaborate rather than to let's say direct or do the enforcement of the regulation. And also think that that's what we see in many other jurisdictions. The most successful ones are where you see a start and growing collaboration rather than being kind of not to say enemies, but have very different positions and so on.
Yes, I think this collaborative approach is something that the industry's been waiting for a long time, and I think it sort of seems to be emerging, and it's good to hear that there's regulators working more closely. I mean, from your perspective, Ian, would you agree that that's better? Is it getting easier to work with regulators from your side?
Yeah, we strongly believe that, we operate on a risk-based approach. From our side, we're not afraid to ask challenging questions within our own organisation. And we've got a very, very strong corporate governance in place. So we have a very strong compliance culture, and that's built and developed constantly. And we always work on increasing awareness and our core values internally. And that just ensures a bit of longevity, and any commercial decisions that we make, they're made with correct information now on hand on how we want to portray ourselves in the market as well.
Yeah.
Under our self-regulation. We have a very strong buy-in from C-level management as well. That's also a key to success in the area. We have to from above. And we find now that the only way, which a key thing now in today's market, is being open and transparent with regulators. There is no way now that you cannot be open and transparent.
Don't try and look for the loopholes.
No.
There's that sort of takes us on quite nicely to the next question, which is what steps can operators take to identify the more subtle behavioural indicators to intervene on problem gamblers earlier in their lifestyle? And obviously this is the kind of aim of the game now, isn't it? To try and, maintain the player life cycle, but to be protecting people and to be ensuring that that's being done the best way. Matt, can I come to you first on sort of where you think those techniques are developing best and what your suggestions would be?
Yeah, no problem at all. From an L&L perspective, I think we can't help but feel that education and research are the most crucial things to consider when looking at these subtle indicators anyway. While I'm not exactly referring to, say, the need for a degree or a qualification, just keeping staff and particularly members of the RG team, for example, up to date with current research from behavioral psychologists, people like that, will ensure that you're all best equipped to identify these indicators, whether they be subtle or not, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, the UKGC themselves regularly cites articles of scientific research with regards to gambling in the UK, although there are countless other sources for acquiring this type of information. In addition to the above, having some specific risk triggers set up based on research as described above, and for which are active in real time from date of registration, helps to build a better understanding of the potential risk and potential for future risk for each customer. triggers related to more financial things such as the payment method used, deposit sizes and frequencies, but also bet values and the times of which they choose to play. I think they're all great places to start. But I think the main part is ensuring equal training for all members of the business, especially those for which are customer facing, such as the customer support departments. This will really help to ensure that no potential concern is missed during a player contact, even if it's just a level of general unhappiness, a traumatic life event which they may have had.
Yeah.
Perhaps they're just not in a good state of mind, if they're intoxicated, something like that. These are all good things to consider.
All things that you would think were kind of sort of common sense, but in the past perhaps weren't as obvious to people to do. What do you think, Ian? Is these the sort of measures that you would be talking about taking? Are there other things you'd like to add?
We strong, so for subtle behavioural indicators, they're very hard to spot. But we do a lot of staff training and a lot of workshops at our end, and we focus very heavily on access and situational indicators. Any sort of access, so it can be anything, type in capital letters. Poor grammar, can be an indicator that a player may not be educated in gambling or not know its way around the site. And again, just to reaffirm what Matt said, it's the education of players we believe very, very strongly in. But we always look for subtle indicators in any documentation we see, any chat, any email, call. And that's always filtered up from customer support all the way up, even to CRM teams, or everybody is now trained and aware of what these little indicators are.
Okay.
You may speak to a player who is a carer, indicate, I'm a carer. That's something that should be discussed with that player. Who are you caring for? What sort of responsibility do you have for this? Are you receiving money for this? Is it your money to gamble with? These are the very subtle indicators. They are very hard to spot, but it's something that we intensively work on now, going forward. And I know it is a big factor for the UK GC to pick up
absolutely
on these indicators that are being displayed.
Absolutely. Rasmus, obviously when we talk about subtle indicators, that is an area where you instantly think AI may be able to help.
Yeah.
Often perhaps more perceptive than humans, who knows. But tell us a little bit about how AI can then sort of play a part in this, in terms of easing the difficulty.
That's something we work a lot with and have invented solutions around based on this scientific approach. I very much agree with both Matthew and Ian in what has already been said. What we think is that it's crucial to not only look into specific markers, not only to look into monetary markers, which is very often what is done, but giving a full 360-degree holistic approach to this gambling behavior, to be able to track and do a more precise risk profile, individualized per player. And we are using AI to do so, and for an AI solution to work properly, we strongly believe that you need to have a very strong target, due to the fact that AI is very good to find specific patterns and do these individualized profiling on very huge data amounts, and data sizes, big data, and so on. But it needs this very strong target. And what we do in terms of this very strong target is doing a human assessment by experts, psychologists, and so on within RG. And they are, let's say, a part of our data model approach on the AI. So then you may say, we are replicating these human experts for the AI algorithm to be a virtual psychologist. That gives us the opportunity to do earlier intervention on very weak signs. It gives us the opportunity to also do a soft and automated intervention, individualized and in context of the situation.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I mean, that's another area that we want to get into is, you know, is self-exclusion sort of a draconian step, really? And do we want to be doing things before we have to get to that point? So, I mean, I guess all of these early interventions, that's sort of the idea, isn't it? You know, do we really want to get to the point of self-exclusion, and what can we be doing before then?
I also add that it also gives the opportunity to what is very often neglected, that is to take into consideration the interaction between risk markers or markers of harm. Because when you have this typical risk marker approach where you define thresholds and alarms and flags, what you call it, you are not very often able to, as a human being, to take into consideration more than, for instance, 8 or 10 different factors. But the AI solution can take into consideration all the factors we, let's say, can feed into it, and we design these factors together with our team of experts. So, for instance, an example is that 2 hours of gambling a day is not necessarily a problem, but if these 2 hours is between 2 and 4 a.m., then suddenly you have another risk situation. So these very small differences in terms of considering the risk situation for each of the players is something that the AI is very strong at, if it has this strong target.
And Heather, from a compliance perspective, do you feel that all of these measures are enough? Is the early intervention the best way for you, or do you feel that self-exclusion needs to still be there to kind of almost bootstrap this kind of protection of players?
Yeah, definitely. I think self-exclusion is always going to have to be an option for some players. I think there's no doubt that some people, even if we interact as early as we can, will still need to self-exclude and to stop gambling. You know, just the same as any other kind of issue with addiction, you have to go stop, full stop. Yeah. I think in terms of GameSys as well, we try, I mean, obviously we don't want people going down that route. So the key aim is for us is to interact as early as possible and make sure that people are enjoying their gambling, because, you know, as a commercial business, we don't want anybody not enjoying what they do on site. And when it gets to that point, you know, we don't want to get to that point. So everything that we can do at the start of learning what the customer's behaviour is, learning what's normal for that customer as well. And then again, as Rasmus says, taking into account these different factors and how they all start adding up to a higher risk profile. That's really what we're working on, you know, and the whole industry is the same. We're really working on how we get that journey to be safe and people enjoy their time on site and don't worry about their play. But self-exclusion still has a place for sure, I think. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, actually, the fact that this is a leisure activity and an entertainment product. So we often, in responsible gambling conversations, sort of get into this really kind of dark area of all these awful outcomes. But actually, ultimately, lots and lots of people gamble very safely and enjoy it. So I suppose that sort of takes us quite nicely to the question about soft intervention being key to the future success. And we covered it a little bit, but in terms of sort of good soft intervention techniques, presumably, I mean, the trick there is that you're keeping that entertainment sense around what you're doing. I mean, I don't know if, Ian, you want to start with that. I mean, what would you say are the best ways to do that soft intervention so that actually the player isn't aware of it at all?
So obviously, a little bit about our product. Really, we maximise the social aspect of our users' experience, and we drive strong engagement with the product always. We have a community. So gambling in its most original form, when it was invented many, many years ago, was friends making a wager. We have all of that on our site. We have chat rooms. We have people who can share bets. You can look up every single person's bets are transparent and open to other people. And people are discussing what they're going to do on our site. It's very, very unique. And that sort of empowers our player a lot to engage with our product. yeah, soft interventions for us, we all just like we'll put lifetime calls into players. Just for a general chat and a checkup, you know, a live telephone call to a player is so much more valuable to us than an electronic communication. And yeah, it really does. That's when your agents are speaking to these players live and, you know, discussing what their activity is and what their transaction, going through their transactional history with them, you know, is
actually having a dialogue.
Really educational for a player. And
yeah.
We have had players turn around at that point and say, you know what, really appreciate this call and I don't want to continue.
That's brilliant.
And just to refer back to the self-exclusion point, you know, the amount of operators that I see who just exclude a player and send them an email, go to GamStop, you know, that needs to be eradicated from this industry. We need a player who wants to self-exclude or is excluded and we know of giving an exclusion. There has to be some aftercare and responsibility from the operator to contact this, to ensure that that player is cared for when he leaves us. And because there's so many operators, you can just go and reopen a new account and do the exact same. Yeah. So we're not actually ever solving the problem.
No, that's a good point. Kerry, would you like to come in on that as well? I mean, do you agree that this soft intervention kind of point about, you know, actually maintaining the players' enjoyment of the products and sort of, you know, helping them at the same time?
Yeah, like I definitely agree with Ian there. I also I do think as well it's around the level of communication that we have with the players and like using our marketing team to gain a better reach. So, you know, by utilizing them, that definitely helps. Providing like the regular tips and advice, I definitely think that makes a big difference. Because by making customers aware of how to manage their gambling, they're far more likely to kind of like stick to them limits. So, you know, by utilizing that all at the beginning, that kind of stops you from getting to that self-exclusion later on. So
yeah, and I mean
the support, right? It's really important not to just offer them the support once you've self-excluded them. Like Ian said, you need to be offering them support along that customer journey.
And that's a sort of point of differentiation, I guess, between all the operators. If you've got that kind of level of care and accountability, presumably, I mean, that's got to be quite valuable to players in terms of who they choose to bet with, right? They know that they're safe. So moving on then to customer behaviour, which is sort of linked, obviously strongly linked to psychology, and kind of we know that. How can operators take a more scientific perspective to better understand player behaviour? Is it possible to create a virtual psychologist? Well, Rasmus has sort of said that we think it is.
Sorry, I already said it.
It's definitely possible. But so Rasmus, pick us up again, sort of from that psychological point of view. What are the psychological aspects that you guys are tapping into and using the science with, and that actually could be replicable into other areas? You know, what should operators be thinking about in terms of the psychology of a player?
Yeah, actually, I think I would add it to the questions about both self-exclusion and very much also on soft intervention, because when we have this virtual psychologist in place, obviously, I fully agree with you, Heather, in terms of self-exclusion have a place also in the future, because that's some kind of action done by the gambler himself or herself. But we also see that from research that between 26 and 60% of all self-excluders break the self-exclusion themselves. So on the other hand, it's not sufficient, but definitely it has a place. So what we, let's say, believe in when we look into this virtual psychologist in terms of soft intervention, I also fully agree, and I think it's very great to hear that you think of this customer journey dialogue all the way through. Ian, great points, Kerry, as well. But when we talk about automated soft intervention, especially with a very big customer database, then we think that this should be based on the specific player's situation, because otherwise, for instance, a pop-up will be, let's say, taken as irrelevant or does not apply to each customer as if it's a generic text. So we believe that if such soft intervention based on this virtual psychologist should be working most properly, or just at least being meaningful, then it should support a positive gambling experience first and foremost. It's a entertainment product we are selling to the customer, and second, it should be concrete and in context of the specific gambler's situation, his risk profile. So be based on what the risk system in place are detecting.
And Matthew, can you come in as well? You were talking about the research, and obviously that gives us some idea. A lot of the time, the industry is sort of feels that there isn't enough research into different areas. Really, do you think the research is there currently for us to figure out this what science and what psychology needs to play into what we're doing? Is there enough information?
Absolutely, it's definitely another key factor to consider when looking at like an operator's policies and procedures, and when they decide to take or make an interaction with a customer. In terms of the amount of data that's out there, there's tons, absolutely tons. I remember I saw a talk with Dr. Mark Griffiths at a Kindred conference back in 2019 in Copenhagen, and his whole segment was with regards to research. Basically, he has tons of free published research on the university website, which I think you can access via Google Scholar quite easily. The UKGC and people at ONS, the Office for National Statistics in the UK, have tons of data that you can use to set realistic thresholds for your customers. Ultimately, it is up to the operators, I guess, as to which parts they choose to take more seriously than the others. But I think when you take a blanket kind of review of all of them, it's quite easy and like you said before, kind of common sense to see which parts can be more easily incorporated than others.
Yeah.
Even research with regards to particular demographics of people which are more at risk, such as younger males. While I don't believe you should immediately interact with all younger males that register on your site, you can help this to build a customer profile and use it as supplemental reasoning for determining when and even how to interact with your customers. In terms of the virtual psychologist, it's not something I gave too much thought to before, but hearing Rasmus's explanation, I think it sounds more than reasonable. I would still want to keep a human element in there, of course, when it comes to LNL, as I think we're doing a good job. But yeah, there is tons and tons of data out there that you can purview.
Hannah, may I add something to what Matthew says? First and foremost, I should have also said that when we're able to do the soft intervention automated with more clients and in context, then we leave the room for the RG resources to be used on the more severe cases manually. So that's also a matter of automation as well. And another thing related to research is that I know for a fact by talking to a lot of operators that it's not necessarily easy to get direct access to research and researchers. And what I should have said in the presentation of Mindway is that actually my colleague is Professor Kim Morrison, a co-founder. So with us, you will be able to have, let's say, access to this. Just yesterday, I had a brief talk to the leader of the research clinic of pathological gambling here in Aarhus, who we collaborate with, and we talked about this question related to what research is there within specifically within soft intervention measures, and there's a lot of research, but that specific question, which tools are working and which are not, what's up to speed and what's old-fashioned, and there is research, but not that much that one could wish for. but pop-ups is exactly something that has been very wide known, and also there's research within this. But we have a kind of a bigger catalog on all these ways to do soft automated intervention in context with the risk profile.
And can I ask, from a compliance perspective, does the use of AI sound appealing or worrying, or that, because just from an outsider perspective, there is always that slight, oh, do we need humans? Can we, it's sort of, people can feel a bit threatened by the idea of automating. But do you think that's a helpful assistance, Heather?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm always going to say data is our friend. Particularly in online business, we have a raft of data for our customers. Using data and AI in combination with the human element is by far the best. We still want, as Ian said, they still want the conversation with a player is still key. You get so much information from a player, but you don't want to be having that conversation with a player who doesn't need it at the time. So again, to Rasmus's point, you want to be interacting with the people who really need to be interacted with. And in terms of what we've done at GameSys, we've done quite a big piece of work in the past around behavioural economics. So looking at what's the right tools, how do we deal with them, how do we put them across to players. In terms of the tone of voice we use throughout the business, we've found that that parent-child work that you sometimes get in terms of responsible gambling language, people really don't like. They really don't like to be told to be responsible.
Yeah.
So it's more about trying to make that normalising the approach to responsible gambling message and making it for everyone, not just for someone who may have an issue.
Yeah.
And we've done quite a bit of work. We've done focus groups on it. We've looked at how we nudge people in the right direction, and an AI plays a big part in that. That helps us to interact when we really want to interact and when we think it's the best time. Again, interacting with a player in a really hot state is not always the best thing, because sometimes they don't want to be interacted with, they won't answer calls, they'll, whatever, they'll log off and go to another site. But again, you don't want them getting to that hot state. So how do we interact with them before they get to that stage? So yeah, so science, it's all about the science, it's all about the data. So yeah.
And that, we're looking obviously from a sort of forward-thinking perspective. And so I guess sort of the great thing about these technologies is that the more data we have over time, the cleverer we get, the better the interventions become, and hopefully the more seamless the kind of entertainment, player protection side is as we go forward.
Can I add? Yeah, sorry. May I also add to what Heather says, is that I think that something to consider is also the fact that taking research into practical use, into practical solutions, practical procedures to use the research on a day-to-day basis is not necessarily easy, because even though all this research is available, then you have to kind of operationalize this for this to be working properly, also into your different applications and systems and so on. And together with that, I also know from the regulatory perspective that there's a growing tendency that regulators tend to also take into consideration if, for instance, detection systems are developed by not the operator themselves, maybe external parties. I also think that in the future we will see that there will be new requirements to companies like us of having independent third parties testing and validating our solutions.
Right.
So I think that's also something that will, let's say, heighten the quality of AI solutions. We at Mindway are focusing a lot on let's say, do the proper data security and anonymous detection and so on, because we also are EU member state based companies, so there's also regulation in that perspective we have to fulfill as well.
Well, that takes us on nicely to the sort of final question, which obviously in the UK there is a review ongoing, and we're all anticipating the results. I mean, will you guys give me a little bit of an idea of what you expect to come out of the gambling review, and also I guess what you hope will come out of it, because presumably you've got ideas about what would improve things and how your lives would be easier working with the regulations. So perhaps Kerry, if we could start with you, what are you sort of expecting the gambling review to throw up, and how do you hope it will pan out for the industry?
I think it'll be there's been talk around affordability now going to be moved into that review, so I think that'll be a big focus, and a lot of what operators will be interested to see what happens there. Mm-hmm. We may even see some stuff probably around the marketing side, so like whether they may put a ban on it like what we've seen in Italy and Spain. So there's lots of different things that we're all waiting to see, but it was interesting to see that around the affordability the last few days that it's going to go into the gambling review. That
is interesting. I mean, have you guys, I mean, anyone who sort of feels prepared to answer, I don't know, you may not have thought about it, but looking at some recently regulated jurisdictions, I mean, sort of Sweden, Germany, other areas where regulation has changed, there's been quite a lot of criticism about the ways that they've gone about the player protection side, because there's a feeling that in an attempt to protect the players, they're sort of creating blocks to playability that push people to the black market. Are you worried in some ways that there might be a little bit of that with the gambling review, in that they're looking at it from the outside, they may not have the sort of stakeholder engagement they need from inside the industry to be aware of those issues, and that we may end up with a market that can't compete with less scrupulous players? I don't know, Ian, if that's something that's ever sort of occurred to you in terms of this.
Yes, the thing is that the industry is ever evolving, and there is a lot of operators leaving the UK now. We still believe the best operators will succeed. I know the BGC do a lot of work with Parliament and ministers to actually, inform them from an operator's point of view what the actual real situation is. The black market does exist, everybody knows that. But I also think players, when it comes to trusting money and balances and the card details, I also think that will be a deterrent for them to go over to that side. But hard blocks on players, it doesn't really work. With the recent call of evidence, and just a nod to what Heather said, like data is everybody's friend, and how we use the data that is available, and how we've used it positively, and the good work we've done. I think with the safer gambling side of things, it will be more of a tweak, because we're in a dynamic market that changes so much, and we're used to that, and that's part of our enjoyment working in this sort of in this field. But I think with the data we have, I still think we will utilize that no matter what comes out of that, especially around the affordability piece that everybody's put so much time and work into. I can't see that just being cast aside. I know there was a bit of a release yesterday in the Telegraph about it, but I can't see it being pushed to one side. I really can't, and I think everybody here in this meeting wants the longevity of the player and the player to feel that they're protected and speed. So we've done all this hard work to get to this point. I can't see it being, pushed to one side now. And I think it'll be more of a tweak than a massive overhaul.
Heather, what are your thoughts in terms of what you sort of expect to see and what you'd quite like to see come out of the review?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, there is arguments that the Gambling Act needed an overhaul. My own opinion is that actually, I don't know if it definitely did. There was this kind of it's an act and an analog act in a digital age. Mm-hmm. I think that could be said for many acts in the world at the moment. The digital age that we're living in has has been immense. You know, we're all living online now. So I do think there is some kind of, you know, that was pushed to do the Gambling Act review where probably regulation could have solved the issues. In my mind, we need to, again, it needs to be evidence-based, any decisions that come out of the Gambling Act review, and I'm pleased to see that that's what they're kind of basing on, evidence-based decisions. Also has to be proportionate to what the issue is at hand. So again, whilst I don't want to downplay that, you know, we have issues with gamblers, you know, who do get addicted, it is very small in the grand scheme. You know, we do have a far greater number of players who have no issues with their play. So I don't want to see any blanket kind of measures come in which would affect those players, you know, and how they play and how they enjoy it. I also wouldn't want to see a black market develop even more, because people who will go to the black market are those people who really need protections.
It's vulnerable.
And they won't get the protections from the black market. They'll get the protections from a regulated industry, which we are. But if that regulated industry shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, you're going to find that people will find a way to gamble.
Yeah.
Prohibition, you know, we've learned from prohibition in the past in America, doesn't work. People find a way, and it tends to be the people who really desperately want to gamble, and those are the ones who need the biggest protections. And we could potentially see that movement. I hope that the government don't go too far down that line. I think there's a balance between protection and freedom of choice and free will, which we do have to kind of take into play in the UK. That's how we operate. And yeah, so I would like to see it come out as a fair, balanced, evidence-based. There will be changes, no doubt, but I want those changes to be based on hard evidence as to why we're making them.
Yeah, not headlines for votes.
Not headlines, no. And we have, as an industry, we're very guilty of kind of running on headlines sometimes and missing the kind of actual facts of the case.
Details. Matthew, what about you? Do you have sort of particular hopes for the outcomes of this review in terms of it kind of assisting player protection going forward?
I agree with both Heather and Ian in the sense that, of course, it needs to be evidence-based and proportional to whatever issues they're acknowledging within the industry. I would truly hope that they don't go back on the emphasis they've put on customer affordability. Even if they were to replace that with, say, something like a hard limit, the option that they have taken, say, with the SGA, that's not really a solution that I agree with personally, as it seems to just push people to the black operators, for which, you know, don't have to abide by any of these particular guidelines. Same goes for, you know, the removals of bonuses and things like that. You're ultimately just making the licensed operators, for which are obliged to follow these guidelines, less appealing. There has been some hearsay, rumored talk of potential hard limits in the UK as low as £100 per month. I feel like that could be an option at a higher value up until the point which you have proven evidence of a customer's affordability, as a way to minimize like the initial risk. Once you've completed your own personal review or used like a third party perhaps, to verify that that is something that could be raised, I think that is an option. But I'd hope that they wouldn't impose, say, like £100 per month loss limit across all accounts, and ultimately just driving people elsewhere. I think looking at what I would expect from the gambling review, you see a general increase in fines being given, penalties being given over the years, which doesn't give me that much faith that self-regulation is being used as it should by all of the big players, big operators in the UK. Should we all come together and promote and share best practice, promoting RG, I think you'd see a higher level of autonomy given to operators to pursue matters regarding RG as they see fit. I'd expect soon.
I mean, do you think that's an argument for a reform to the GC in terms of the way that they regulate, or?
It's tough to say. I feel like they're doing a good job, of course, and they're taking the feedback from the operators too. I would have to say that if the industry doesn't clean up its act with regards to those that are slacking, it does bring the whole industry down together. And it only takes one bad apple to ruin the bunch, as they say. And I feel like eventually the financial penalties that they've been given will reach such a level which they don't even matter anymore. They will instead look at the revocation of licenses as a default for failures instead of fines, which is, I think once you've set that precedent, that's hard to come back from.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Rasmus, sort of from your perspective, how do these sorts of reviews play into how you guys design the products, how you look at what you're doing? What is your sort of outlook from the gambling review and other reviews similar sort of changes?
Obviously, it's always relevant for us to follow such processes like the current review in the UK, and we're also doing this elsewhere. And that was also one of the reasons why we elected Birgitte to our board, because then we have an even better overview and opportunity to follow this. Currently, for instance, some of the risk markers set out by the UK Gambling Commission is something we already take into consideration when we train the model for UK clients. We have other things to consider elsewhere. We also, for instance, in the UK, take into consideration that you can't cancel a withdrawal anymore. But you can do that elsewhere. So in other jurisdictions, of course, we also need to take this into consideration, because that's a sign of a kind of a risk factor or a higher risk, for instance. So of course we let's say follow this very much so, and I agree with all of you in this, and I think that both in the UK and elsewhere, I think this is maybe a kind of result of too many market participants prioritizing it too low or not doing enough on the self-regulation, because if they did, then the regulation may be different. On the other hand, you have this very tricky situation as an operator, from my perspective, that you are kind of doing a high jump without a bar, because no regulator will tell you exactly what is sufficient, because then the regulator maybe think that they only will get what they say they need and not more.
Do you have something to add, Heather?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. It's an interesting one, because I think when the goalposts keep changing and regulation, it's a real struggle for any operator to try and keep up with that. And I think over-regulation as well is a real fear factor. We've seen that in Sweden, where the regulation hasn't maybe been thought through quite right. To use Rasmus's example of cancelled withdrawals. A consequence of people not being able to cancel withdrawals now is that people are not withdrawing. So again, that's now created a slightly different risk factor. So now we're kind of pushing people to withdraw, and having to do it differently. So it's one behaviour doesn't necessarily negate a problem. It can sometimes create another behaviour. And I think for us, as well as in the UK, the regulator does have part of the regulator's code is to promote the industry, and I think probably we've seen in the last few years that that's not really maybe existed as much as we would like compared to other industries. What we want as an industry is, and what a regulator should want as well, is a healthy, competitive, well-run industry who do take their consumers very seriously. And I think we would all agree that the consumer is very much at the heart of all of our businesses. But I think that's one thing, is that what I would like to see is changing is that good practice in the industry is actually promoted by the regulator. We're starting to see more good actors getting the kind of, pats on the back or kind of recognition, rather than it always be negative in terms of fines and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And also it's examples of best practice, isn't it? If you can see them, you can replicate them. But if we're in this constantly sort of adversarial approach, it's harder to pinpoint the stuff that's good. I sort of probably nearly time to wrap up, but I just want to give you all a chance to kind of add anything that you didn't get a chance to mention, if there was anything at all that you wanted to pick up on before we close. Is there anything extra that anyone else wanted to mention?
I do have one thing actually. L&O Europe, the company I work for, is originally a Dutch company, and we've just completed our application for the upcoming Dutch license later this year. Of course, they're going to have their own regulations now. It looks like they've based it somewhat on the UK's model with some differences, of course. And part of the approach that they've taken is the need for an addiction specialist, expert, as they say, to review your policies and sign off on them and do updated reviews throughout the year before they'll grant you the license. I guess that harkens back to the research that we spoke about earlier. I feel like if operators are finding it difficult to obtain research or even have them put across in a way for which are easy to understand, that could be a good option in terms of future regulation. Personally, if it was up to me, I feel like that's something I'd incorporate in the UK, as if you could have an addiction specialist sign off on the policies that you've got. It at least shows that you're on the right track with regards to, and then you just need to build on that as time goes on.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. Something that I'm surprised I haven't heard before. Yeah, that seems, again, it's like a common sense solution that for some reason isn't more prevalent. Is there anything else at all?
Yes, may I add to what Heather was saying just before in terms of the entertainment part. We want you want your customers to be entertaining themselves, and isn't it just also a good ROI? I think it may have to be the best way to do business is to have a healthy gambling environment, and all the minority of clients of yours that are having problem finding them and then taking care of them in the best way possible. That may be what everybody is aiming for.
Yeah, without a doubt, Rasmus, is totally the case. You know, I don't think any operator wants customers who come in, burn through their money quickly and self-exclude. That's just not, you know, I mean, looking at it commercially, we spend quite a lot of money getting the customers to actually register and play. You don't want to see that happening. You want a customer who's going to be with you for years, hopefully. So yeah, totally agree. And, you know, the return on investment is key here, and that's why you want to be doing all of this work around, you know, safer gambling with them, for sure.
Kerry, have you anything to add at all before we wrap up?
No, I think everybody's covered it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, guys, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I think it was really, really interesting. I think I'm going to be using the high jump analogy, Rasmus, now forever about regulation. That was the perfect example.
Excellent.
High jump without a bar. That is it. So thank you very much. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your days.